The Brussels Report podcast.
Welcome in a new episode of the Brussels Report podcast. My name is Pieter Cleppe, and I'm the editor-in-chief of BrusselsReport.eu. It's been a while that we had a podcast, but I'm very happy to have today as my guest Stéphanie Daher. I should say Dr. Stéphanie Daher. She has done a PhD in political science and international relations, and currently she's a researcher at the European Foundation for Democracy, a great think tank here in Brussels, working on things like radicalisation, which Stéphanie is an expert in, but actually much wider than that, also on disinformation and particular Chinese and Russian disinformation campaigns. So that's actually the topic that we are going to discuss today. So welcome, Stéphanie.
Thank you, Peter. Good afternoon, and thank you also for hosting me today.
Sure. So let's maybe get into it. For listeners, what is disinformation? I mean, it's not easy to define, but according to you, how would you describe this particular challenge and problem?
Indeed, Peter, disinformation is a phenomenon which has been expanding rapidly, I would say, and evolving in an unprecedented manner. But not only in Europe, it's a transnational issue, which has also been exacerbated by recent sociopolitical issues which have been emerging and surfacing across several levels. So I would say that the phenomenon of disinformation or disinformation has actually been raiding our TV shows, news, but most importantly and most prominently are the online channels and platforms. So, and this is particularly important because over the last few years, this increasing trend and the catastrophic repercussions, I would say, of the spread of disinformation has showed us how it can be manifold and can impact several categories of individuals, most particularly or most prominently the youth.
Yes, and before we go to Russia, which is of course the most obvious and maybe well-known candidate back from the Soviet days even, let's maybe start with China. I mean, you are based in Italy, and I saw that at the beginning of the COVID crisis, when the Italian hospitals were overwhelmed, China was actually sending some help to Italy, and there was some criticism that other European countries were supposedly not doing enough. And then on Twitter, you saw all kinds of hashtags, Grazie China, and this apparently seemed to be the result of a proper disinformation campaign organized by the Chinese Communist Party, by the government. So maybe you can develop a little bit the tactics and practices that particularly China engages in this regard.
Yes, indeed, Peter. Actually, the COVID-19 pandemic is the most representative example, I would say, of the disinformation campaign in general, but also to the Chinese disinformation campaign, which, as you have anticipated, I will talk about some strategies and tactics which were actually employed throughout the pandemic, and also when the vaccines also were introduced, as well as the campaigns to encourage the public on taking their vaccines. I would just like to outline a point here that various governments and individuals from all across the world have actually contributed considerably in the diffusion and the spread of this information. However, numerous studies actually and analysis have documented how China and Russia have played a leading role in amplifying and spreading the disinformation campaign campaigns on the COVID pandemic, which focused mainly on two topics. The first is the COVID origin, the COVID-19 pandemic origin, and the second one on, as you have mentioned, Peter, the efforts of Western governments in curbing the threat of the pandemic and imposing restriction measures and responding to the threats of the pandemic. So in particular, China mobilized, let's say, an array of multilingual state media, social media platforms, as well as government officials to try most prominently to divert, I would say, the narrative from the country where the virus originated to the country that came to the rescue of other nations. So in other words, China tried to shift the blame of the origin of the virus from its own territories using disinformation, but as well as conspiracy theories. It also worked on improving its global image in magnifying the virtues of how it has managed and how it has responded to the threats of the COVID-19 pandemic. Zooming in on the example of the tactics and strategies that it has employed, I provide here an example of a Chinese state-owned website called the Global Times, where it has tried to blame the pandemic and the spread of the virus on the Italians, as you have mentioned, especially in the first days of the crisis, where few information and few knowledge on the pandemic and its spread was actually known by the public as well as societies. At the same time, China has, while doing that, it has worked on sending medical supplies to Italy, and it has done so, as you have correctly cited, Peter, through a promotion of a wide campaign, and it promoted it vastly using the hashtag Grazie China, or its translation Grazie Cina, or its translation Thank you China,
Yes.
with the ultimate aim, let's say, of showing how it has provided support to Italy more than the US and the EU in this respect. I also mention here that a lot of videos circulated on social media which showed people clapping for the medical aid which was coming from China. It was later on revealed that they were actually doctored videos coming from original videos showing people clapping for medical workers, as we have seen on social media everywhere. So just to recap, the disinformation campaign, the Chinese disinformation campaign on the COVID pandemic focused mainly on 2 points. First of all, disputing the origin of the virus through casting a lot of doubts on where the virus actually came from and attributing it to diverse origins, Italy, for instance, and on highlighting the misrepresenting democracy's failures and the responses to the spread of the pandemic.
Yeah, and if you look at the actual end result, maybe today we can see this zero COVID policies in China really degrading in some kind of totalitarian manner. Horrible scenes with like cages being built across across houses and windows. So yeah, maybe if they ever had any success, hopefully that may not really be so the case today, right?
Yes, I fully agree with that, especially since they are also working on, this is part also of the misinformation. They're trying to blind in a way the what is actually happening in terms of the current imposed COVID restrictions, as you have mentioned, Peter.
Mm-hmm. And maybe on a slightly different note, would you say that like things like instruments like TikTok, it's a Chinese social media. I mean, I personally think it's actually very very powerful algorithm. It's very good in determining it's very good in figuring out, I think, what users like and what they don't like. In my view, do you think TikTok and AI, does this play a big role in that, or is that not proven that TikTok plays a role in all of this?
Of course, I mean, I would refer to this, in other words, to the dynamics of supply and consumption of this information. So, as you have mentioned, the supply in the sense of the technologies that are in hand. So, social media platforms, as we know, they are very diverse, and the users, be it youth or other categories of individuals, resort mainly to these fonts of this information. And TikTok also shows how actually different messages or different digital platforms, because mainly TikTok, as we all know, relies on the not on audio, but also on the picture, if I may say, how it can transmit also disinformation campaigns. So here we need to understand how the evolution of these dynamics and the factors at play, on one hand, in terms of the supply of these technologies in hand, especially since they are increasing in a very rapid way. We talk of bots also and other methods that actually use artificial intelligence, such as, for instance, social media accounts that are automatically controlled. And on the other hand, we have the consumption, so the dynamics of consumption and how users are influenced and what actually they resort to in their supply of news and funds of resources in this.
Okay, interesting. And then maybe let's go to to Russia. I remember having seen an interview by or an interview with a former KGB agent, somebody who had fled to the United States in the 80s. And he was basically explaining all the relatively sophisticated techniques that Russia was using to try to influence the political debate in the West. I mean, I think it's pretty common knowledge that Russia is still engaged in this. But could you maybe develop a little bit how it is doing all that at the moment?
Sure. I would like to outline here a very important point, Peter, is that, as I have mentioned, that Russia and China are the leading actors in disinformation campaigns. However, they use, like it was documented in several studies and analysis, they use different tactics and strategies. And actually, with the recent also Russian invasion of Ukraine, it was shown that they actually learn and they build up on one another's propaganda. So this is, if we can call it also a learning process between the two actors. So coming to the Russian disinformation campaigns, they mainly seek to undermine faith in Western efforts, and they build up and they exacerbate the tensions and the polarizing sentiments that already exist in the West. And it was also documented in several studies that Russian actors have actually fine-tuned these tactics and strategies over the years. The Russian invasion of Ukraine actually provides us with a concrete example of how the tactics are employed. And I would like also to outline that this is, although this is not a new emerging phenomenon on the level of Russia. So, for instance, from the illegal annexation of the Crimean Peninsula in 2014 and coming to today to its ongoing military aggression against Ukraine, Russia has waged a sustained and coordinated state-controlled and disinformation campaign, not only targeting the Russian population, but also targeting its its neighbors, actually, in neighboring countries, as well as the rest of the world. If I may provide here an example of a narrative which was diffused in line with the current war in Ukraine, relating to the the Russian claim that Ukraine is conducting genocide against the Russian-speaking population in the east. Russia has falsely accused Ukraine of genocide. It has also drawn groundless parallels with Nazism and World War II, and it has also worked on fabricating stories. Very briefly, I cite here an example of a Russian television report who actually accused Ukrainian forces of crucifying a young boy in eastern Ukraine at the beginning of the conflict. Fact checkers were quick to prove that the story was entirely made up, and there's a lot of similar stories which continue to be produced in our current days. I would like also to mention that such claims focusing on genocide have been equally debunked by independent Russian media, among others.
Mm-hmm. Okay, interesting. Maybe let's move to what the European Union is doing. I know there's some, disinformation's website, EU Disinfo. Personally, I have always been a little bit wary of that. I mean, not of the fact that Chinese and Russian information are a big problem, but when the government sort of has a website where it classifies what is true and what is false, I think any solid supporter of freedom and civil liberties should always be a little bit skeptic at the minimum, right? But then, what's your opinion on this? Has this been a great exercise, or maybe less?
Yes, I agree with you on this, in the sense that as we encourage and as we actually outline and underline the importance of fact-checking resources and funds of news in order not to fall into the loop of disinformation and actually contribute in an indirect way to the spread of disinformation, even without knowing that. The same needs to be done also in on other websites or social media funds which actually underline, or let's say counter, the disinformation news. So of course I am a proponent of critically assessing and critically evaluating the funds and encouraging encouraging critical thinking whenever we resort to any piece of information, especially when we do not have solid funds on the piece of news or the piece of information at hand. You have referred to the EU VS Disinfo project or the website, which is actually, Peter, is a flagship project of the European External Action Service, which was established in 2015, and it actually adopts a reactive approach, if I may say, in the sense that it works on addressing and responding to the Russian Federation's ongoing disinformation campaigns, which greatly affects the European states, but as we have seen also other non-EU countries. The aim of this project, and I encourage also the listeners to actually check the website online, especially since they have a very vast database, as I will explain in a few, on Russian disinformation campaigns and debunking these claims. The aim of this project, as it was explained to us thoroughly in a project the European Foundation for Democracy has conducted in collaboration with the US mission to the EU to increase public awareness and understanding of these disinformation campaigns, as well as to help European citizens and develop some kind of resistance and societal resilience to such digital disinformation as well as manipulation. So just to outline very briefly, they analyze data and they monitor actually media in 15 languages. And they identify and expose disinformation campaigns originating from pro-Kremlin media that are spread across the EU, but also across Eastern Partnership countries. To give you just an example, Peter, their database, so it's called the EU vs Disinfo database, comprises around 12,000 samples of pro-Kremlin disinformation. So as you can imagine, this is a very vast and detailed database, which is updated regularly on a weekly basis, together with published articles and analysis debunking these disinformation claims and myths.
And are there any other EU initiatives in this area?
Yes, for sure. The EU has been working on also on the proactive approach, so on the preventive approach, especially on the legal framework. I mentioned most prominent of which is the 2018 EU Code of Practice on disinformation. And actually this code was revisited around, I would say, 3 weeks ago on the 16th of June, if I'm not mistaken, 2022. And it was delivered as the strengthened Code of Practice on disinformation. So in a few words, this Code of Disinformation was the first time worldwide that actually that industries such as giant big tech companies such as Google, Facebook, and Twitter have agreed on a voluntary basis to sign up for regulatory standards for the aim and objective of reducing false information which is spread online. So it was actually also complemented by an action plan by the European Union, and the goal of this action plan is to disseminate counter propaganda, but not only that, it works also consistently on communicating facts in an approachable way in order to build up a resilient society or resilient other side of the story, as we may call it, that citizens should understand and absorb in order whenever they encounter false information or disinformation. One thing also I would like to outline, Peter, is that during the COVID-19 pandemic, the EU Action Plan has actually compromised also what was called the COVID-19 Disinformation Monitoring Program. And this program acted and worked on ensuring that online platforms are held accountable in tackling disinformation and monitoring their transparency standards in this.
Okay, interesting. Maybe to conclude, what would be your sort of policy recommendations to better handle this this challenge of particularly Chinese and Russian misinformation campaigns?
I mean, as we are unfortunately very familiar with is that disinformation is, we need to take into consideration first and foremost that it's a very complex and multidimensional phenomenon we are dealing with as individuals and also as governments. So what I would say is that it has been recognized by various studies as well as reports that it needs to be addressed from this perspective, from this multidimensional as well as multi-stakeholder policy framework. In the framework, as I have anticipated, of the project that the European Foundation for Democracy has conducted over the past months in collaboration with the US mission to the EU, where we have conducted several online webinars as well as a closed-door workshop with youth, we have formulated or we have advanced a list of recommendations touching most prominently on first the cultivation of media literacy and digital skills. And this actually was a point which was outlined by youth. So whether they are students at schools and universities, as well as young professionals coming from the EU, coming from Europe, as well as the US, in that they talked about introducing digital or media literacy courses at the level of schools, as well as at the level of universities. Also, they talked about the support of independent research, which is focused on monitoring this information phenomenon, as well as building tools and research techniques which can help and aid in countering online disinformation. What was also very interestingly outlined, Peter, is the role of the media and journalism in actually spreading awareness and contributing to the knowledge of how online platforms work and how information is actually diffused across different across these different platforms, but across different digital forms. So whether we are talking about audio, picture, and so forth. So I would conclude just with this observation that, as we all know, this information is highly complex, and thus it calls for nuanced understanding of the phenomenon and mapping, most importantly, of the involved actors at stake, because as we all know, there are different actors, whether they are state or non-state actors, that are greatly contributing, and they are actually structurally contributing to the spread of disinformation and diffusing in the aim of diffusing their objectives behind the spread of this phenomenon.
And maybe one more thing that I wanted to ask you: is it the case that young people are more vulnerable to being sort of influenced by these campaigns, or that's not the case?
So several studies have worked on identifying this point. To tell you very honestly, currently we do not have data that says that they are the most vulnerable, but because some studies have also outlined how elderly people are actually also considered vulnerable categories. So if I may say, we do not have the exclusivity of the vulnerability of categories of individuals, but what I would say is that given their being the main user exposed to online information and relying on online platforms to extract the information or to be informed about specific events, youth are actually the most exposed to the negative repercussions of disinformation, and actually the most prominent of which is inducing polarizing sentiments and actually contributing to their potential radicalization processes in this respect. So I wouldn't say that they are the most vulnerable, because it has also been proven that other categories of individuals are actually likewise vulnerable, but undoubtedly they are the most category exposed to information funds and relying on these funds for their information.
Okay, yeah, because they spend a lot more time online, of course.
Exactly.
Okay, that was actually very interesting, Stephanie. Thank you very much, and let's stay in touch.
For sure. Thank you very much, Peter, again, and hopefully we talk soon also on these topics, especially with the rapidly evolving phenomenon.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
The Brussels Report podcast.